Good afternoon from sunny Geneva. Good morning if you're just waking up in some part of the world. Good evening if the sun is already shining where you are. My name is Stephen Stone. I'm with the UN Environment Program. We are supporting the Stockholm Plus 50 informal working groups. And you're joining us today for the third working group, informal working group, which focuses on accelerating implementation. That part of the working group and the leadership dialogues that focuses on picking up actions and moving forward. With us today are our co-hosts from Kenya and Sweden. I'm very grateful for their presence, as well as our co-chairs from Finland and from Egypt. We have a really exciting conversation with you today. I'm so glad you can join. We look forward to it being interactive. We look forward to it being dynamic and exciting. And most of all, we look forward to learning from you as we prepare for this journey towards Stockholm Plus 50. Without further ado, what I would like to do is turn it over to Dr. Macharia from Kenya, who is joining us live. Dr. Macharia, over to you as co-host of the Stockholm Plus 50 International Meeting. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Came from Kenya, and Kenya we are excited as co-host to Stockholm Plus 50 engagement. We are excited that so much is happening so fast. The informal working groups, the leadership dialogues, and the side events are all exciting, and we are excited to see that the event that we are co-hosting with Sweden and UNEP and other organizations is moving on well. Today I would like just to welcome the participants to this meeting and to again reiterate Kenya's commitment to see that the event is a success. So far it has been so good, but we have only a few days remaining, and we hope that the same commitment will continue so that we deliver an exciting event. Thank you very much, and I wish you fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Macharia, for joining us live from Kenya today to kick off this informal working group, the third informal working group for this Leadership Dialogue 3 on accelerating the implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development in the context of the Decade of Action. Thank you so much. And colleagues, today we also have Ambassador Johanna Litzinger joining us today. She's the ambassador in charge of Stockholm Plus 50 from Sweden. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much. And good also to see our Kenyan friends. So distinguished participants around the globe, we have 16 more days to go until many of us will meet in Stockholm. I will be brief in my introduction because I think these hours are really your hours. It's very much about hearing that variety of voices. Having the floor, though, I would, on behalf of this side of the co-host, would like to make maybe three comments. The first one, really, I think, encourage you to use today to be focused in your interventions, to focus on the key messages, the key recommendations, as we would like to see as an input to Stockholm, and in a redefined version also as an outcome of Stockholm. For that, it will require also sometimes prioritization and above all, I think listening to each other. Secondly, I would like maybe to put the work of this informal working group in the context of the expectations for Stockholm Plus 50, which were laid out in the concept note. And you will know from the concept note that it was outlined expectations of rebuilding relationship of trust, accelerate system-wide action, connect and build bridges across agendas, and rethink conceptions and measures of progress of well-being. And I would encourage you to see today's discussions on the focus on clear and concise key messages and recommendations in the context of those expectations. And let me then also just, I think, end with concluding that these informal working groups has been of, I think, immense value to all of us. We had the engagement principles of focusing on implementation, looking at interconnectivity, connecting agendas, connecting different disciplines, but also having an intergenerational perspective. So this has very much been in listening to a variety of voices, which we hope we will continue today, and then of course bring to Stockholm. And let me also just thank, on I think behalf of the co-host, sincere thank to of course the participants, but also to our able co-chairs who has been guiding us both in New York at the formal meeting and also at this informal process. So very much looking forward to today's discussion, and we'll listen in during these 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those opening words and those welcoming words. Indeed, 16 days to go. I think you said the other day, or Ambassador Njambi from Kenya said hashtag 22 days to go. So no, hashtag 16 days to go. And for underlining the purpose of this particular informal working group 3, to sharpen the emerging recommendations and urgent actions coming from this leadership dialogue. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Annika Lindblom from the government of Finland. She's one of the co-chairs that was just mentioned by our ambassador. So Annika, over to you. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you, co-hosts, for your kind words and encouragement also to this meeting and this leadership dialogue. So distinguished ambassadors and participants and dear colleagues, it's good to be back here with you. And from our point of view, the preparatory process towards Stockholm Plus 50 meeting in June has been very effective, very intensive. And most of all, it has been conducted in a positive spirit and collaboration. And we are thankful to all participants, to all of you, as well as co-chairs and co-hosts for this journey together. And my special thanks to our skillful colleagues in UNEP who have supported us throughout the multi-stakeholder discussions and process. So as we have heard, this is our third and last informal working group meeting of the Leadership Dialogue 3. Now it is the last time to ensure that we will have concrete recommendations, concrete actions to be submitted to the ministerial discussions in the Stockholm Plus 50 high-level meeting in June. My plea to all of you is very straightforward. Please move from general statements to concrete action. We know the key messages from the earlier discussions on Leadership Dialogue 3, they pool around 3 key themes. First, to mobilize and scale up financing and align it with the SDGs. Secondly, to reimagine and reform governance systems, structures, and mechanisms. And thirdly, to renew and strengthen multilateralism. We have collected some proposals from earlier discussions, and the Secretariat will show you the collection of key issues and messages as we move forward on the agenda. The outcome of the Leadership Dialogue 3 preparatory process is shaping up nicely. But the challenge remains for this meeting, how to concretize these messages. Let me give you some examples. So we know that the finance gap to implement the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement is still enormous. We have heard that countries have not met their international financial commitments. They have not sufficiently transformed their economies to a sustainable path, and they have not mobilized their domestic resources to reach climate neutrality or to meet the people's needs. But what are the means to change the course? So this is the topic of today, really how to achieve these objectives. We also know that there is a need for systemic solutions to systemic challenges, like the triple planetary crisis. We all know that environmental protection and economic growth should be mutually supportive, and our economic models should ensure that no one is left behind. We have heard that trust is in many ways broken between the countries and within the societies, yet it is one of the most powerful assets to ensure happy people in well-functioning and prosperous societies. But what are the concrete institutional mechanisms we need to employ and the political decisions we need to take in order for this to happen? This is also on our agenda today. So you will soon have your 2 minutes. Please use it effectively by providing your solutions to the pertinent problems and challenges. And instead of informing us on what needs to be done, please, it would be very valuable to hear how do we get there. So I, as a co-chair, I am encouraged by the constructive atmosphere of the preceding meetings, and I'm looking forward to being inspired by your deliberations also today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Annika, for helping us to focus on the task before us today, those concrete actions, moving from general statements to actually concrete actions that we together and you as co-chairs can bring into the Stockholm Plus 50 conference. Thank you so much for that. Without further ado, I will turn now to Ambassador Mohammed Nasser from Egypt. No, I believe it is Mr. Mustafa Saad. Mustafa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Allow me at the beginning to extend our deepest gratitude to our distinguished co-hosts, to our distinguished colleagues from Finland, our co-chairs, to you, to UNEP, and the entire support team that has helped enrich the discussion in this working group, and that have supported all our efforts to reach the point where we are now. My gratitude and thanks are also extended to all the participants, all the stakeholders whom without this discussion would not have reached this point. When we started this endeavor 14 weeks ago, the greatest challenge was how not to embark upon yet another new initiative, which might replace existing processes and that would hold hope and goodwill for a couple of years before starting to lose impetus and stall in its own manner. Egypt made it clear from the early beginning in every discussion that all participants should avoid at all costs the urge to create new processes and to better focus the efforts on how to reactivate and reinvigorate already agreed processes and mechanisms. In our concluding remarks in every session, we asked all participants to think aloud what we as states, governments, and stakeholders were doing right, and where did we veer off track, and how to correct our collective heading towards a common goal, that is to develop while conserving this planet, which facilitates this development. Throughout the informal working groups and the preliminary session in New York, the discussion went from general statements on how there was a need to scale up finance and how it was necessary to enhance governance mechanisms, to more concrete recommendations, recognizing few but focused key issues. These are to scale up and align financing with the Sustainable Development Goals, to reform and enhance economic enabling environments, to accelerate debt relief and commit to SDG-linked special drawing rights, to reimagine and reform existing governance structures and mechanisms, to close the digital divide and guide the digital revolution, and to renew the people's faith in multilateralism and collective action. These emerging recommendations are the summary of ideas and statements issued by concerned states and stakeholders, representing a wide spectrum of socioeconomic realities and backgrounds, from developing to developed states, international and regional organizations, civil society, activists, and concerned individuals and academics, and most prominently, the youth of our nations. They all propose vigorous and ambitious action to address the challenges we face. However, transforming ideas into actionable proposals is a major challenge. Today, we asked experts from various disciplines related to the issues at hand to engage in the discussion to help refine and formulate these emerging recommendations into actual actionable proposals to take to the international meeting in Stockholm. While doing so, Egypt, in her capacity as co-chair, would like to deliver a loud and clear message to all representatives, participants here tonight, to explore practical, feasible, and just mechanisms to transform these ideas into actionable proposals. Practical in that they seamlessly complement and integrate with already agreed upon mechanisms and processes, and that they further enhance and promote the deliverability of already existing pledges and commitments, among which the Copenhagen Commitment by wealthy nations to channel every year 100 billion United States dollars to climate finance in less wealthy nations. Feasible in that they take into consideration the relative capabilities of states, especially in the current global economic and social crisis, and allow for policy space to pursue the most appropriate mix of policies suited for a symmetric national context, while recognizing that there is no one single magical solution which is fit for all. And just in that it recognizes differentiating responsibilities, spillovers, and that they will guarantee everybody's fundamental right to development, and that no nation, state, group, or individual shall nor will be left behind. By this message, I conclude my opening remarks, and over to you, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. Very loud, very clear, compelling remarks about focusing our attention on recommendations and actions that are practical, feasible, and just. And you've made my job a lot easier as well, Mustafa and Annika, because you've laid out the substance of the conversation today. There is a slide, and thank you for your patience, colleagues who have been waiting for us to go full screen. We will, but there is one slide that I want to share with you before going to full screen. And this is a slide which looks at those topics that Mustafa and Annika that you've just put onto the table. And the purpose here is really to focus our minds on these three clusters of topics. And for those of you who have been with us in the earlier informal working groups, you will recognize these. They're actually in the original background papers, which are posted on the web. And these have been evolving under the leadership of our co-chairs to the point where we are now reaching emerging recommendations and urgent actions, which will be taken into Stockholm plus 50 in just about 2 weeks' time. So these are the three cluster areas. You heard it from Mustafa and Annika: accelerating and mobilizing finance, digital transformation, and effective partnerships, because the task is simply immense, and collective actions to strengthen multilateral cooperation. And Annika, you spoke to rebuilding trust, which came up in earlier informal working groups as well, to restore the trust in our governance mechanisms so that they can deliver this justice, this just transition that you spoke to as well, Mustafa. As we transition to this first session on accelerating and mobilizing finance, I want to move to the next slide very quickly. And here I'll invite our speakers. We have a few invited speakers for the session to help reality test the emerging recommendations. That the key messages as they are evolving is around mobilizing, scaling up, and aligning finances for the SDGs, for the climate commitments, as our co-chairs have mentioned, for the nature challenge, and I would say for the pollution challenge as well, to talk and speak to the triple planetary crisis. You will notice here some of the language is very direct. It speaks to those who can get the job done. And Mustafa, to your point about not inventing a parallel process or a parallel track, really anchoring these things in existing fora where they're already being discussed. So this is our ask to the speakers. When you respond to these different recommendations and to these different urgent actions, also tell us, are they feasible? Are they practical? Are they just? And do they already have a home? Where do they go after Stockholm plus 50? All these things will be very helpful to us. So with this, I would like to thank our two co-chairs, Mustafa and Annika. Of course, I'll be coming back to you as we bounce ideas and we hear ideas from our speakers as they guide us on the practicality, feasibility, and just aspect of these different recommendations. So if I could ask the technical team to take down the slides, and we'll move to our first speaker of the day to help us reality test. This will be Andrew Mitchell from the Nature Disclosure Task Force, rather. Andrew, if you're with us today, if you could turn on your camera, you might need to raise your hand if you're not visible to the GDKP staff. And then from Andrew, we'll turn to Martin Luck. He's the Executive Director of the Capitals Coalition, to Joji Carino, who's the Senior Policy Advisor for Forest Peoples Programs. And then finally, Gunnar Rundgren, who's with GrowLink AB, a private sector. So, Andrew, are you with us today?
Yes, I'm here. I hope you can hear me. Nod if you can.
Can hear you, can see you, Andrew. So you have 4 minutes to help us reality test the emerging recommendations. Over to you, Andrew.
All right, cool. Well, look, I've got 40 years of experience in the environment at the front line to try and offer you some insights. And I want to congratulate everyone on what you've done so far, but I'm going to be quite specific. On the question of subsidies, I think this is super important that we reform that. You've got it in there, but I don't think the wording is right. I think the problem with that is people get worried about taking away subsidies because it creates cheap food and cheap energy. So it's better to use words like realign the subsidies towards environmentally positive outcomes. That gives you a slightly different twist on it. Yes, we have to get rid of the harmful ones, but it's not about taking it away and leaving people stranded in an unjust way. It's about perhaps realigning subsidies to have environmentally positive outcomes. So that's one thing I think you should look at. And remember, all the money that governments are putting in to protect biodiversity is about 150 million a year, but the subsidies that are harmful to nature are at least 5 to 6 times bigger than that, and more if you believe the Dasgupta review. So even if we doubled all the money that's going into nature protection, we wouldn't come close to defeating the money that's going against that process. So I don't like the idea of constantly asking for more and more money in that situation. It's not just about mobilizing more finance, it's about demobilizing negative finance. So we've got to do 2 things. You ask for more money, yes, you must, but you will never win unless you deal with the subsidies and you deal with the second big issue, which is private sector nature negative money, which is huge, far bigger than anything I have mentioned. So another key thing that does not yet come out in the recommendations is tackling the movement of money fundamentally around the world that's nature negative. And that's mainly from the private sector. Not always intentional, but it's huge. So I believe that unless we fundamentally change the movement of money, we will continue to finance ourselves into extinction. That's a stark reality. Everything we're talking about here will be as nothing unless we grip the private sector funding that is environmentally negative. Now, the problem is they don't know whether it is or it isn't. If you're up there in a big bank, you don't really have the data available. And if you're in a big pension fund, you certainly don't have the data available. They're dealing with trillions of dollars, not millions, not billions, but trillions. So we've got to work on that. We've got to give them more data and a better dashboard. So my final point is the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, which is a twin to the one on climate, the TCFD, which many businesses are working on and governments. We need to move on from carbon to everything else: water, landscapes, forests, oceans. And that's why the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature, has been set up. So we need better risk management and more disclosure on these things, and we need the frameworks to do it. And then eventually governments will need to make them mandatory. And by doing that, we can start to fundamentally change the movement of money. I don't think that comes over well enough in the recommendations. I'll stop there. There are many more, but I hope that gives us something to talk about. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Andrew. Very, very useful comments. Very focused as well, responding to the request from our co-chairs about realigning subsidies as opposed to just removing them. Also tackling nature negative financing, not just focusing on mobilizing more and additional resources. Thank you so much for that. And actually, we're going to move to our next speaker, who is someone who could help us with that as well. His name is Martin Luck. He's the executive director of the Capitals Coalition. Martin, you've also seen the recommendations as they're evolving. Reality testing, concrete, practical. Over to you, Martin.
Yes, thank you very much. And I will follow up immediately on some of the points that Andrew made so eloquently. My name is Martin Lok, Executive Director of the Capitals Coalition. A little bit less experience than Andrew, but over 30 years within the Dutch government and now within this NGO. Let's start immediately with the rethinking, reforming the incentive mechanisms. Indeed, that is very necessary. And the staggering amount of environmental harmful subsidies at a yearly base around the globe is $1.8 trillion US dollars, 1.8 trillion. This comes from a publication, Business for Nature, the B team has published in February. I'm also part of Business for Nature, the collaboration that brings an ambitious business voice to the CBD negotiations around future nature policies. And this rethinking the incentives is one of our key elements. Yes, governments need to start rethinking these subsidies. Eliminating is one answer, but repurposing, as Andrew already pointed out, is also a very important and good point. At the same time, my 30 years of experience within the Dutch government shows that this is already on the table for a very long time. So we probably have to do a little bit more to really work on this. One of the things could be that we make it mandatory for governments as well as for the recipients to disclose the subsidies with negative impacts that they are implementing, or the incentives with negative impacts that they are implementing. This is one of the very practical discussions that we brought to the table in the CBD negotiations from the business perspective. Businesses also stating, yes, we think it's a good idea to start doing this, disclosing what we get. So that's immediately making it very, very practical. I think, although there might be a difficulty there still, but I come back to that later. The other thing, and it's almost worrying, but again, I agreeing with what Andrew brought forward, is it's good to look at scaling up finance for development and the environment, but it won't do the trick. And we need much more, and what we need to do is to make all finance the power of the good. So, and that needs a systemic change in how we organize society and specifically the economy. And in order to get there, we need to do, I think, three things. First of all, we need to redefine the measures of success. The current measure of success starts with money, ends with money, is only money. Whatever a type of money you're using, dollars, euros, yens, whatever. But that cannot be the only element. So we need to bring in the value of nature, of people, of societal interconnections there, natural, social, human capital, as it's phrased by many, including my own organizations. A practical way to get there is to, and again, I go back to a mandatory requirement, make it mandatory to disclose and assess the impacts on the environment. We can do that. There are already a lot of good examples from businesses, from governments that are doing it. A lot of people say it's not possible. The standards are coming more and more to the front. The last thing we need is radical collaboration that really links what government, business, and finance are doing together.
Thank you very much, Martin. You've got some very practical ideas there. Mandatory disclosure of nature negative subsidies, of the use of the public purse to change the price structure that producers and consumers face. Very, very interesting. And you've mentioned the $1.8 trillion figure as well. You also talked about additional or different metrics. And that leads me well to our next speaker, who is Yoji Carino. Yoji Carino is the Senior Policy Advisor for Forest Peoples Program. Yoji, we're looking to you also for practical, feasible, and just ways of sharpening the recommendations that are on the table. Yoji?
Thank you and greetings to everyone. Thank you also to the first two speakers, Adrian and Martin, because they covered important aspects that I won't anymore focus on. Therefore, I'd like to focus on the actor-oriented and action-oriented part of scaling up financing. And here, in response, I would like to highlight the vital role of what I'm calling frontliners in addressing the crisis situation. As we reflect on the COVID-19 health emergency, the world applauded the frontliners composed of health workers, caregivers, bus drivers, and so many volunteers who stepped up to the challenge of social and community care. Let us remind ourselves that oftentimes these frontliners are among the lowest paid workers in the economy, barely surviving on minimum wages. Yet they are able to deliver compassion and service for those most in need. With respect to the biodiversity and climate crisis, indigenous peoples are among the frontliners in the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of the Earth's ecosystems. But also we are among the most left behind in the implementation of the SDGs, as evidenced in the voluntary national reports. These are realities of our economic, political, and social systems, which have marginalized the poor and the powerless in matters of state and business. So how can we deliver on prosperity for all when today's wealth has been historically built on cheap nature and cheap people? For example, today, on the backs of impoverished delivery workers of goods made available 24/7 at the click of a button. So today's economy, which is built, as I mentioned, on cheap nature and cheap people, has to re-examine its values. And where do we really put our values in today's crisis, right? Is it on biological diversity, which is the wealth of the planet, and in cultural diversity and inclusion, which is the wealth and source of resilience within the planet and society? So what are some of the obstacles that are actually stopping the mobilization of this support for what I call the frontliners? So it's very good to see that multilateralism has put these important issues right in the center of our common agenda for all. But multilateralism needs to be complemented by radical democracy. That is the full inclusion of society, including the most powerless, which is still very weak. For example, in the climate change negotiations, it is under consideration in the CBD post-2020 framework, but is still very weak in, for example, the national implementation plans and strategies when we get there. So sometimes we talk of the middle, but actually it is the bottom that is still currently very much neglected in our approaches. And how to do this, I think, is a very important issue. Thank you.
Yoji, thank you so much for sharing that with us. The attention to frontliners who had to carry the load during the lockdown and the pandemic, and also your call for radical democracy, full participation around governance structures. We'll also come to that in section 2 of the conversation around governance partnerships and the digital revolution, but also your point about diversity being the wealth and the health of our planet and our people. Thank you very much for those points. I'm going to turn to our fourth invited speaker today. He is Gunnar Rundogen. He's the founder and senior consultant of GrowLink AB. Gunnar, you have the floor, and perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what is GrowLink AB for those of us who don't know as well, as well as orienting your comments to the practicality, feasibility, and the social justice aspect of the recommendations before you. Gunnar, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Good afternoon. Well, I sit in Sweden where I live on a small farm. So I'm a small farmer, but I'm also a consultant. GrowLink is just a consultancy company for what I and a few colleagues are doing. More importantly, I was the president of the International Federation of Organic Agriculture for 5 years. And I think I will speak globally about the importance of organic agriculture as a strategic avenue for this. Agriculture is in the center of the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity, and pollution. It is also the stage for major challenges today for food security, fertilizers, and energy. The triple crisis and the three challenges makes it urgent to look into alternatives for agriculture development and food security, which are not based on costly and harmful inputs. Approach already practiced by millions of farmers in both developed and developing countries. In some cases, organic agriculture may be a marketing opportunity. I have myself worked many years with market-oriented organic projects in East Africa and in other places, but also without access to premium markets. Organic is simply a good agriculture practice that reduces exposure of people and the environment to pesticides and chemical fertilizers. It promotes soil health and the buildup of soil organic matter, which draws down carbon from the atmospheres and makes soils resistant to drought, to erosion, while ensuring long-term fertility and future yields. It promotes biodiversity in the farmscape as well as in surrounding landscapes. A healthy soil is also a prerequisite for healthy and resistant plants, animals, and finally, people. Organic agriculture is therefore also resilient and contributes to food and nutritional security. While it does feature, so here I am again. While organic features some modern technologies and innovation, it also builds on traditional and indigenous knowledge, which are adapted to local ecological and cultural conditions. The emphasis on local nutrient cycling makes it resilient and much less susceptible to input price shocks, such as the current fertilizer price hike, which is really devastating for farmers who got used to use a lot of fertilizers. This is particularly important for poor farmers and poor countries alike. The total emissions from making and using chemical fertilizers is the main source of agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. Nitrogen overload of ecosystem is a major threat to biodiversity worldwide, and it's one of the planetary boundaries that is already overstepped. Fertilizer subsidies are extremely costly and are largely hidden fossil fuel subsidies, as fossil fuels are used to produce nitrogen fertilizers. In contrast, in organic farming, nitrogen supply to plants is managed through natural processes, biological nitrogen fixation, or through improved nutrient cycling. And it's certainly a lot more affordable than nitrogen purchased in sacks, often imported. Organic farming, both in its certified and market-oriented version and as a good agriculture practice, is a very cost-effective path for agriculture development, and it's a nature-based solution in its truest sense. It is practical and directly applicable, while at the same time, it represents real systemic change of agriculture and food production. It contributes to enable to phase out harmful subsidies, in particular for fertilizers. Organic agriculture internalize environmental impacts, not only cost, but also a lot of benefits actually are internalized in the organic production system. Thank you.
Thank you, Gunnar. Thank you for sharing that with us. The point about resilience in particular, being exposed to the price shocks that we've seen recently for different synthetic inputs or mineral inputs, phosphates, potassium, these kinds of things, and actually having a healthy soil for healthy people, for healthy ecosystems, being a much more resilient way of moving forward. Thank you so much to our colleagues who have joined us as invited speakers, Martin, Andrew, Yoji, and Gunnar. We're going to turn to participants from the floor who have expressed interest in joining the conversation today with us on this first section about mobilizing, scaling, and aligning finance for the different goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, the climate goals, the nature and pollution goals. Let me just ask those of you who are participating today to raise your hand if you haven't already. They are Yoku Liu from the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force from Japan, Fanny Sila from the Ministère de Transition Écologique, France, and also Alex Rafalowitz from the Fossil Fuel Treaty Task Force. So Yoku, if you're here, if you could turn on your camera, great, I see you. Yoku, you have the floor. Please, you'll have 2 minutes for your contribution.
Hello, thank you for letting me speak. So thank you for the floor, dear chairs, member states, and distinguished delegates. I'm Yoko Liu, representing both Canada and Japan. Speak on behalf of the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force. The Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force has been working on the policy paper representing the voices of young individuals and youth organizations, including global economic systems. The upcoming meeting is the opportunity to present a more concrete law to UNEP on the coordination of programmatic coherence in regards to the climate finance, moving away from siloed discussions. Major global finance crises affect regions with reduced capital flows. Therefore, finance is tied to job loss and the motivation to work. Green jobs are paramount as they raise awareness and enhance environmental consciousness. Financial access is directly linked to livelihood, helping families and business plan long-term goals. However, we highlight the role of youth inclusive financing in the context of multilateral finance. GCF, for instance, sees various cross-cutting priorities, and youth parameters should be included in that aspect of the financing. We call upon the UNGA to give a more clear and direct road to UNEP. A third of adults are still unbanked, and half of these are women and those in poor households, rural areas, and unemployed. As such, digital finance needs to be included for everyone so no one's left behind. Corruption, tax evasion, and illicit financial flows needs to be stopped in respective countries. Resource needs to be allowed with research for further development of technology via reforms mandated by governments through internal discussion with international question for diverse sectors. And it's important to highlight transparency in funding. A consultation system should be publicly available online. Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Yoko, for joining us today from Japan. It must be getting kind of late there. Thank you for that contribution and for your voice from a youth perspective. We have from the floor, Madame Fanny Sila from the Ministère de Transition Écologique. Fanny, are you with us? Could you turn on your camera, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the floor. On behalf of the European Union and its member states, I would like to thank the co-chairs and UNEP for organizing this meeting of the Leadership Dialogue 3. We are really looking forward to the discussion in Stockholm, and we believe it's important to identify this limited number of concrete recommendations to which the discussion should lead to. And we believe this first part of the discussion is crucial to be addressed. Our main recommendations are focusing on implementation and connecting the environmental agenda, especially on the financial aspects, as outlined in this key message 1. In particular, we think crucial that this leadership dialogue promote the alignment of global financial flows with climate and biodiversity goals, and the shift of fiscal systems away from environmentally harmful activities. But it should also promote the valuation of natural, human, and social capital alongside the financial capital. We also believe this discussion would be the opportunity to encourage a better use of financing, including promotion of efficiency and co-benefits, as well as elimination, reform, and redirection of environmentally harmful or illicit financial flows, in addition to encouraging increased financing from all sources for biodiversity and climate. It should also promote and build capacity and mobilization of finance from all sources, especially domestic finances, through the strengthening of taxation capabilities. And lastly, we see this key message as crucial to start and initiate discussion and have a call to the development of reliable indicators that could measure the impact of investment on climate, biodiversity, and environment to facilitate more comprehensive impact analysis and to direct finance for green transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fanny, for joining us and speaking on behalf of the EU. Very important points, not only about financial capital, but about natural capital, among others. So we have additional participants from the floor. I would like to see if Alex Rafalowitz, who has spoken before, but has a very interesting message from Fossil Fuel Treaty Task Force, joining us from Colombia today. Rafael, are you with us? Alex, rather?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you all. I will start with a short meta point before getting into the more detailed proposals around finance, and that is, of course, that respecting the mandate of this conference, that it is not to establish new mandates. We don't necessarily think that means that it's not within the mandate of this conference to identify the need for new and enhanced approaches of multilateralism and cooperation, because we know that fossil fuels are the driver of the climate crisis, the principal driver. They're a huge driver of the biodiversity crisis and of the pollution crisis, and yet there is no global governance approach for fossil fuels. There's a new peer-reviewed report out today which supports the IEA's conclusion that there can be no new fossil fuel infrastructure on our 1.5 degree pathway. But beyond that, 40% of all existing open fields will need to be decommissioned if we are to meet our 1.5 degree goal. And we have no global governance to support us to meet that. So I would set a challenge for all participants to really grapple with what that means and really ask, are our existing institutions up to that task? My suggestion will be that they are not, and that we need to make some recommendations with respect to that large gap. On the question of finance specifically, I just wanted to note that it's not only a question of supporting mitigation and adaptation and loss and damage, or it is also a question about how do we support governments and economies to diversify if they are transitioning off fossil fuels? And that is a destination of international support and finance we have not yet considered very well. How do we support and ensure access to energy? And then in terms of sources, it's not only about innovative products, but also innovative sources for finance. And I'd encourage folks to consider windfall taxes on large fossil fuel corporations, to consider SDRs from the IMF, and to consider approaching ISDS, investor-state dispute resolutions, as another form of perverse subsidies against the interests of the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for joining us again today, and for your very sharp and clear messages, your call to conscience. It's heard loud and clear. And also, you know, in terms of aligning finance, I'm also thinking back to the climate conference, which has a very specific article on aligning all finance to the climate goals. I think it's 2.1C or something. So that's what we want to do. We want ourselves, as the co-chair said right up front, to be very much grounded in the ongoing discussions and see the ball moving from Stockholm Plus 50 forward. At this point, my apologies to participants who still want to speak. There will be other opportunities in session 2 and session 3. I'd like to take the chance to go back to our co-chairs and see if they have reflections on what they've heard on this first round. I think, Mustafa, you were the last speaker, so let me just check with Annika. Annika, would you like to come in here?
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you all for very, very concrete and important points that you have raised. I think what was mentioned about, you know, redefining success was one of the key messages from almost all all of you who spoke, and the sort of emphasizing not only the financial capital, but also natural capital and social capital and human capital. And social capital is, of course, deals with trust and coherence between different groups of people, for instance, in the society. So that is also very important. And then we also talk about the how to measure success. So we come to the discussion on metrics and indicators and going beyond GDP and all that. And I think those things have already been mentioned in our discussions earlier, but now I think we received also some more concrete elements into that. Also the fact that actually there's a lot of money out there, but they are in wrong places. They are supporting unsustainable development, and this is also something that I think we have referred to. We have talked about the importance of not only the quantity of financing, but also the quality of financing, and I think this is very important. And also the access to financing, that we have the capacity to really manage the financial resources. So there are many important points that I noticed. The vital role of frontliners, I think, was also very important, and sort of and how really we need to understand that many groups of people, indigenous peoples, people in vulnerable situations are actually the ones who are suffering the most out of different crises, be they pandemics or climate change or other environmental crises. So that is also very, very important. Youth inclusive financing. I know that, for instance, in Finland, we have a gender inclusive financing, a pilot going on in our national budget, but this is also maybe worth piloting and taking on board. Very interesting proposal. Disclosure, I think this is also something that we have not maybe discussed enough. Disclosing nature negative subsidies, be it government subsidies or business enterprise private sector subsidies. I think it would be quite a powerful tool to really move away from environmentally harmful subsidies. These are only some reflections from what I heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annika. Mustafa, would you like to come in on what you've heard?
Thank you very much, Stephen, and to all our experts and panelists today. Thank you very much for your input, and Annika, thank you very much for your comments. I agree with Annika. We listened to some very interesting and constructive ideas. The issue of disclosure is one of the important issues that were raised today. We have not discussed it thoroughly. We might have referred to it in abbreviated manner, but the issue is one of importance. I think again the issue of the frontliners and the idea of radical democracy in participation is of due importance. The promotion of financial and human capital and the mobilization of the existing financial and human capital, the realignment of subsidies and rather than the tweaking of the language to realign rather than eliminate or remove. I think the issue of language tweaking as well, as Andrew gracefully mentioned, is of importance in sort of smoothing out the messages and in the recommendations to be more acceptable to a wide variety of the audience. Better risk management, better frameworks to do that, the availability of data and platforms to manage private financing, the need to demobilize negative finance. They're all very constructive ideas that need to be maybe formulated into proposals. However, I have just one remark on the issue of rethinking negative subsidies, and it touches with the issues of fossil fuels, because negative subsidies, as much as they entail economic activity that is harmful to the environment, but that there is a need to, while rethinking negative subsidies and demobilizing negative subsidies and negative finance, but there's a need to complement that with accelerated action on transfer of technology and make new innovative methods and alternatives economically feasible. I would take fossil fuels as an example. As it stands today, now, if the example is minute, but as it stands today, an electric car, for example, is significantly more costly than a fossil fuel used car. It is not that it is not the future. It is the future. It is what needs to be. But what we need to rethink is, while we are revisiting negative subsidies and trying to realign subsidies towards less harmful economic activity, there is a need to mobilize transfer of technology, make it readily available to all or most nations and societies, make it available at a just cost, so that to even incentivize, to incentivize such transfer and such and such gradual transfer in a just manner. Other than that, I again thank everybody who have participated in this first round. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Mustafa, for signaling the importance of alternatives as we close one door, which might be the natural or nature negative, opening the door to alternatives. And you mentioned electric vehicles being one, but more importantly, the shifting of technology as well, making the technology available. And that's a great way to segue into session 2. If I may appeal to our technical teams to put up the slide, the introductory slide for session 2, and also to thank our speakers, our invited speakers today, and introduce the invited speakers for session 2. Session 2 of the discussion today focuses exactly on the point that you just made, Mustafa. It's really about effective partnerships, it's about technology, and it's about managing in a way the digital revolution, the digital transformation in a way that's equitable and just, digital just being one form of technology. Here, colleagues, we have some very interesting recommendations that are available that you saw in the first slide. And if my colleagues from GGKP will put up the second round slide, I would appreciate that. And essentially, we have some additional speakers. So while the session 1 speakers turn off their cameras and depart, thank you very much, Andrew and Martin and Yoji and Gunnar. I would like to invite Karthik Balakrishnan, who's the co-founder of Actual from India, Dr. Asa Pearson, who's the research director from the Stockholm Environment Institute, and Dr. Adil Najam, who's the dean of the Frederick Pardee School of Global Studies at Tufts University, to join us and to put on their cameras along with the co-chairs. Colleagues, for those of you who can now see the slide, the key message too is around governance very broadly, but governance that also applies to technology and digital technology as well. So you're seeing some of the actions, the urgent actions and emerging recommendations here in this cluster around governance systems that reflect the diversity and wealth of knowledge from different parts of the community, from gender groups, from age groups, governance systems that are sufficiently agile to provide real-time feedback, the data regulation, the digital economy, the digital access, and all that goes with it. Also, being able to address the crises synergistically and coherently across different policy spaces. And then also considering environmental protection and economic growth as mutually supportive. Also bringing in intercultural equity as well as intergenerational equity, which are themes that we heard from IWG2, as a matter of fact. So with this, colleagues, we'd like to turn to our first invited speaker. And let me see now if Karthik, if you are with us, if you could turn on your screen, please. Excellent. Thank you so much, Karthik. So over to you. And again, I just repeat the request from our co-chairs at the opening. You've seen some of the emerging recommendations. So really, how can we make them more practical? How can we make them more feasible? How can we make them more socially just as we take them to Stockholm and beyond Stockholm? Over to you, Karthik.
Great, thank you. And my name is Karthik. I'm calling in from San Francisco. I'm the co-founder and president of Actual Systems. I'd like to start by thanking our chairs, moderators, and co-panelists for their insightful remarks. My comments today really build on substantial work performed by others. As a technologist with experience in digital transformation of industry and government, I'll discuss how digital governance technologies can help us realize our climate and SDG goals. Transforming our institutions in this climate era must happen in the context of complex social and governance system, which requires coordination across borders, between languages and disciplines, through time and over generations. Coordination requires digital governance mechanisms like systems of record. A system of record is a trusted digital source of truth, which provides stakeholders with a repository of 4 things. First, diverse knowledge, including from indigenous and local communities. Second, a repository of commitments to meet SDGs and pathways. Third, tools to develop and document actionable mitigation and adaptation plans. And fourth, progress and learnings from implementing solutions which enable technology transfer across borders. Systems of record allow actors to transfer knowledge, know-how, and technology by bringing disparate information together into one place, allowing actors to quickly identify their roles and specific next step. Systems of record, however, require foresight, the socialization of their benefits, proactive investment, and collaboration between the public and private sectors to build and deploy. The public sector and the private sector must both act. The public sector must first ensure that every individual has access to high-speed internet and clean electricity. Without this, people will simply not have access to systems of record with the information they need to act. Second, the public sector must provide resolutions, targets, SDG and climate guidance in a form that can be hosted in systems of record so that actors actually understand and can plan against targets that are relevant to them. And third, the public sector must ensure that data hosted within these systems of record are used for mandatory reporting, forecasting, and planning. The private sector also has an important role to play. The private sector must build a variety of systems of record. Every sector, whether it's finance, whether it's agriculture, whether it's transportation, has different needs and has different requirements for what kind of information, data, and planning is necessary. The private sector must meet the needs of these disparate sectors. Second, the private sector must work closely with diverse communities so that the information that is in these systems of record is available in a form and language that they understand. It must be usable. Simply having a data repository is not helpful if people can't understand what to do with that information. Third, the private sector must learn from the information stored in these systems of record to improve plans, to improve outcomes, to look at gaps between sectors, and to enable the transfer of technology, scaling of technology in a way that meets the climate goals in an equitable and fair way. Interestingly, with these actions, a virtuous cycle emerges. By prioritizing digital and energy transformation in order to deploy the systems of record, we actually achieve some of the SDGs more quickly and enable transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Karthik. I'm just going to prompt you a little bit more on the systems of record. For those of us who are not familiar with the term, can you give us a concrete example in how what you might expect from a meeting like Stockholm Plus 50 in dealing with an issue like that? Just to ground it.
Yeah, the system of record, you can think of it, for example, in the accounting space, right? Where an entire company or an entire organization is using one piece of software, one tool for all of their accounts payable, all their accounts receivable, versus having receipts in a filing cabinet in multiple different places. It allows, whether you are the individual on the ground, whether you are at the top of the organization, to have an accurate, true sense of what is actually happening, what your targets look like. And so one of the challenges that we've seen working with larger organizations is that when they're operating in multiple countries, when they're operating in multiple places, it's very hard for them to understand what are the targets in different areas, what am I subject to, and specifically, what is my organization actually doing to address these things? And so this is really about ensuring that people are mandated and required to set up systems where all the information is going into one place. So when you say, what is your company going to do today, tomorrow, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there should be one place where that information lives in each organization.
I see. Thank you so much, Karthik. And if you could share some ideas or best practices or links into the chat box, I think that would be really, really helpful, because this is what it's about: transparency, accountability, and governance systems. And it sounds like you've got your finger on it. We'll turn to our next speaker, who is Åsa Persson. She is leading the scientific study that will feed into Stockholm Plus 50. Åsa, great to see you today. On the session 2, it's focusing on governance, technology, digital. You know the topics. How can we make these recommendations more practical, feasible, just?
Thank you very much, UNEP and the co-chairs for inviting me. And you're all very welcome to join the launch of this scientific report tomorrow, where we elaborate some ideas. I wanted to focus not so much on the digitalization here. It's super interesting and promising, but more the reimagining and reforming governance system and what we say in the report. I do think the current recommendations in the draft are very important, but they need to be sharpened. We need to assign clear responsibilities and specify the actors to take them forward. So I'll start with intergenerational equity. Stockholm Plus 50 could be an important moment to make a step change here. And we have also heard ideas from the UN Secretary General in our Common Agenda report. There might be a future summit next year and so on. So that's a process where they can be taken forward. There are many ideas out there and actually mechanisms to translate this principle into practice. So we think that government should formalize now the representation of future generations in decision-making through appropriate mechanisms, such as ombudsmen or future committees. Government should take a longer-term view by undertaking future impact assessment of new policy proposals according to a predefined timescales to really institutionalize this longer-term view. The idea of a future lab, specifically supporting low-income countries with strategic foresight within the UN institutions, is also very interesting. I think this needs to be underpinned by really effective communication to really shorten the distance between us and future generations. And if you think about it, those under 50 years of age in this call, we were future generations in 1972. So I think that the future is getting closer. A second point on policy coherence, where the challenge is really to translate this aspiration to design smart systemic solutions that we all subscribe to into follow through at the implementation stage. It's also very important to assign responsibilities. There's a saying, everyone wants to coordinate, no one wants to be coordinated. So here we think governments, again, have a key responsibility, of course, to remove all environmentally harmful subsidies, like many previous speakers have already said, and realigning these harmful financial flows and investments, but also to institutionalize policy coherence into policy processes. Governments should only use integrated and systemic approaches to policymaking, including conducting sustainability impact assessments as a mandatory procedure. There are many methods and tools to systematically analyze interlinkages between the SDGs, for example. There are tools to apply wider system boundaries in policy analysis, and again, to consider these longer timescales when assessing impacts. Policy coherence is also a procedural question, and it's about participation, which interests, which constituencies get to speak and influence policy. So here it's very important that governments and all public institutions ensure for transparency of the policy process and open access to documentation. In the report, we also comment a bit on rights-based approaches and also education. We think it's time for really taking a next step on nature-based education for governments to work with education authorities to revise curricula. But I wanted to also highlight what we think is maybe missing here, and it's a focus on accountability. We need to ensure a culture of accountable promises. So we could do much more on tracking action and progress on multi-stakeholder pledges made under our existing processes, and also start our meetings with accountability for us. So we start with reporting progress and then move into making the new pledges. Thanks a lot.
So thank you. That's jam-packed full of ideas and very practical suggestions. And I guess if we want to learn more, we'll have to join the launch on the 18th. The Stockholm Environment Institute and the Council of Energy and Water launch on the 18th. But very interesting ideas around, you know, a generational ombudsman, a futures lab, some very concrete, practical suggestions there. I'm coming to our next invited speaker, who is Adil Najam. He's at Boston, and he's been a futurist and a future thinker for some time. Adil, your thoughts about making these recommendations more concrete, more tangible, more practical as we head into Stockholm +50.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you can see me there. Thank you for having me here. I don't know if I'll make them practical, tangible or not, but you had asked us to be feasible, focused, and worth doing. Feasible, they will be. Focused, I promise. Worth doing, boy, yes. But easy, no. So if you're looking for easy, intangible, go and grab a cup of coffee. I'm not for that one. First of all, let me say, I think we really need to go back to the spirit of Stockholm. And we need to remind ourselves what the spirit of Stockholm was. The spirit of Stockholm was urgency, it was ambition, and it was rebellion. Remember that at this time in Stockholm 50 years ago, they were not sure the meeting would happen. The developing countries had said at this point, right where we are, about 40 days before, they would not show up because they did not have ambition. Remember that when they got to Stockholm, the drafts they came with were all thrown out, and they renegotiated because they were not ambitious. I will be very happy if that happens. I think we need to bring back from vanilla slogans to real action. That was the spirit of Stockholm. That is why we are celebrating the 50 years. There are many conferences that go away because they keep saying what everyone was saying. What does that mean? At least three things. Time is short. I'll be very, very quick. First, bring back focus on the environment. What do I mean by bring back focus? UNEP was created. Stockholm's cry from developing countries was that the stuff was everywhere. And it was created to bring back focus. And what we've done is we've created a cluttered system again. Stockholm should be saying, stop negotiation proliferation. There is 500 days of negotiation now in 365 days. We are so busy negotiating that we have no time to act, particularly poor countries with less capacity in their ministries. Stop the treaty clutter. We have created jobs for ourselves. I apologize, but that's what we've been doing. So Stockholm, I think, should really take a serious stock of where we've come in 50 years. We have a clutter of governance. That's the problem. It's not good governance or bad governance. It's a clutter of governance that keeps us busy, but keeps us also from action. Keep the promises. Keep the promises. Stockholm in particular was about international environmental justice. That's not a word that's come up very often in this conversation. It needs to. We need to go back in all of these things to the polluter pays principle, which was Stockholm's biggest legacy. Where is the talk of loss and damage? Even in climate. Today, as we speak, where I come from in South Asia, 1 billion people, 1 billion, have been facing temperatures of 100 degrees Fahrenheit plus for 30 consecutive days. Where is the loss and damage? I'm not trying to be angry. What I'm saying is the governance systems need to get back not to making new promises, but keeping old ones. I do not want any new promise. Just give me a list of the promises made and tell me where we are on keeping them. That should be the spirit of Stockholm. And finally, acknowledge the age of adaptation. 1.5 is not going to be reached. Take it from me. There is no pathway to 1.5. I'm sorry, scientifically, there just isn't, no matter what we say. So let us expect, we keep mitigating, we push for more mitigation. But about 3 billion people in the world today are facing adaptation today. That means adaptation is development. Go back to where Stockholm started. The greatest thing Stockholm did was it brought development into environment. And if Stockholm 50 doesn't do that, doesn't take us from the cute slogans that we have become very, very good at in the last 10 years, then it will be a conference that will not be remembered. My apologies for being fast, and my apologies for putting too many things, but thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Ajil. No, you've been thought-provoking. I think you've grounded us into a reality that we might overlook from time to time, and you've thrown down the gauntlet in terms of a challenge for all of us going towards Stockholm plus 50. I would like to say at this point that we are opening the floor to participants, and I'm sure, Ajil, you've sort of kicked off a lot of thoughts, including from our co-chairs, by throwing down that gauntlet. We do have some additional participants who will be coming in from the floor. So let me invite them to turn on their cameras, or at least raise their hands so the teams can flag you. Felipe Victoria from Ocean Conservancy, Julia Sidik from the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force, Francis Mcguire from the World Health Organization, Adna Karabogojev, excuse me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, from the Green Climate Fund, and George Anapridze from Veritas Global. If you could put on your cameras. And Ajil, I'd like to thank you again for that reality check. It's good. We need to have our eyes open. We need to walk into this fully awake about the size of the challenge. And you've mentioned the heat dome over the Indian continent, the subcontinent, for the past 30 or 40 days. This is the future. And if we don't take action, essentially, this is more is coming, more and worse. So let me hand over to our speakers. Let me see now if Felipe is with us. Felipe, can I see your camera? Turn your camera on, please.
Good morning, Stephen. How are you? I'm right here.
Excellent. Okay, wonderful. Felipe, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First and foremost, I want to congratulate our two co-chairs, Egypt and Finland, for their leadership throughout this process. As this is the last meeting, I just really want to congratulate them for having steered us and narrow and funnel all the great ideas that the previous speakers throughout the different sessions have expressed. And also to all the speakers that have contributed with great and innovative ideas in that sense. I would like just to quickly link the reimagining of the different governance systems with the other topics as well. And I think it's very important for us to be able to work outside of the silos and build those cross partnerships in general. And the reimagining of the governance systems should also be or funnel towards the idea of, one, mobilizing finance and using government structures to deregulate or regulate, depending on the topic that it might be, so we can actually mobilize finance, but as well reimagine those governance systems to renew and strengthen not only the trust of the public towards multilateral institutions, but multilateral institutions in themselves as the member states work together, right? And so I think it's very important to on this topic also be able to work cross-sectoral as well, help and understand the reformation or the reimagining of governance systems that can also buttress or help mobilize finance and strengthen the multilateral institutions in that sense, we at Ocean Conservancy have been working extensively building those partnerships, trying to bring to the table governments, multilateral institutions, and civil society around many of the ideas that we have spoken here. It is an honor and a privilege to have participated so far in all these dialogues, and we look forward to further engagement and possibly speaking at the conference in itself to share some of the concrete examples of the work we have done across Southeast Asia, in Latin America, hopefully at some point Africa, mobilizing finance, reinforcing institutions, multilateral institutions, and helping reimagine government systems through many of our policy work and ideas. Thank you, Stephen, back to you.
Thank you very much, Felipe. And, you know, working in that space of oceans where it is a public good and open access good, and governance is such a key issue there. So I'm sure you have a lot to offer to the conversation, and encourage you to also share some of those links into the chat box as well. We'll turn to our next speaker from the floor, who is Julia Siddick from the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force. Julia, if you could throw on your camera and open your mic, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Loud and clear.
Thank you. Dear chairs, member states, and distinguished participants. My name is Julia Siddick from Poland, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Working Group. Firstly, we call for increased efforts in widening youth participation. With youth being the most driven to action, we need to be recognized as equal stakeholders in environmental action. Recalling the SDG 17, which explicitly highlights the importance of partnership in sustainable development action, we continue our call for committing to expanding formal and non-formal education regarding the causes, effects, and solutions of the triple planetary crisis to enhance capacity among youth, prepare them for green jobs, and build a sustainable future. However, while today's youth are the most connected and the most knowledgeable generation ever, we still face significant marginalization. We call for immediate scaling up of financing, capacity building partnerships, and youth inclusion as a standing item across all the MEAs. Public consultations should be strengthened. While being grateful for the opportunity to have this dialogue together, youth, and especially girls, need to be given an equal platform. Secondly, recalling the 10th SDG, highlighting the rapid digitalization, we call for increased efforts in reducing inequalities in access to information and technology. Even as of speaking, we are utilizing internet to have this dialogue. In today's society, governments ought to urgently establish programs widening internet access, targeted to youth and other marginalized groups, eradicating technological exclusion. With developed nations continuing to increase their consumption, we currently call governments to immediately establish a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to phase out fossil fuels. We also wish to urge governments to strengthen the environmental rule of law and ensure that the pollster pays principle is applied by integrating all environmental, social, welfare, and health costs to harmful activities. We, the Youth Working Group, appreciating the call for precise goals, eager to engage with you in the near future. If we don't act now, who will? Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for that contribution and that call to action from you and from all of the youth that you represent. I'm going to move to the next speaker, who is with us. Who is Norita Quigahanta. Norita, if you're with us, if you could throw on your camera and your microphone, please. And if Norita is not yet with us or identified, then I would move to Francis Mcguire from the World Health Organization. Francis, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm not actually from WHO, I'm from Lancet Countdown, but I wanted to just flag WHO's initiative because you asked for alignment across the various different MEA approaches, really. And what I'm observing, if you like, from a health background is that health isn't featuring very strongly, human health isn't featuring very strongly within this conversation, and that perhaps there's something there about building in the coming weeks. So for example, next week, it's the 75th anniversary of the World Health Assembly. And perhaps this process should connect with that next week. If you haven't already done that, you may well have done. It's just that I'm here, so I'll flag it. And also, as I said, I mentioned the WHO initiative for climate smart healthcare that was launched at COP26. So maybe there's a place there to link into that at Stockholm 50 and see if that could be built on in the run up to COP27 as well. So there's some alignment here between what feels like quite an environment agenda and not and other agendas that are going on, so the climate agenda obviously, but health is one way to bring environment and development together, as was mentioned earlier. It's really critical that that happens, otherwise this will be in a sort of environment box, which means it's not always very relevant for sort of people on the ground, if you like. And then a reflection really more from me perhaps, but I've worked in the field for over 3 decades, and it does strike me that the ongoing problem is that not everybody is convinced, if you like, by the problem of pollution, whether it's climate change pollution or PM 2.5 pollution. And so even though the science tells us what we need to do, it doesn't lead to government and industry action. And really, we can take lessons from the pandemic, which are that when governments give clear messages about the threat and have a clear plan, then people and industry follow. And so what I think Stockholm Plus 15 really needs to do is to provide those clear messages and that leadership, bold messages and bold leadership, so that industry can deliver that just transition and come in behind governments. But there needs to be clarity and sort of fewer moves forward. And one aspect of that clearly is that fossil fuels are seen as a pollutant and described as a pollutant, whether that's local or whether that's global. They are a pollutant, and we need to shift the way we think about them.
Thank you, Francis, for those really important points. Health being a gateway to talk about the environment, because essentially health is critical to all of us and central in a way. And also the importance of governments having clear plans for establishing the playing field for the private sector and for other actors. Very, very important points. Thank you for sharing them. I'm going to turn to our next speaker, who is Adna Karabegovic. I think I might be pronouncing that wrong. Adna is with the Green Climate Fund. Adna, I hope you're with it. Well, tell us who you're with. Let me not assume. Over to you, Adna.
Thank you, Stephen. My name is Adna Karabegovic. We can work on the last name pronunciation at another time, perhaps. I am with the Green Climate Fund. Thank you for having us, and thank you to all of the members who have spoken and colleagues, as well as the co-chairs of Stockholm and the co-chairs of this panel, or this leadership dialogue. I'm here from the GCF. We're the world's largest climate fund. Currently, we have more than 190 projects in developing countries, working with 200 partners and totaling about more than $37 billion in assets under management, which is $10 billion of our own, and then 27+ billion that has been co-financed through both the private and the public sectors. I wanted to just recall some of the statements made by chairs from both Finland and Egypt, especially in providing practical, feasible, and just mechanisms to the outcomes, while at the same time highlighting the current mechanisms that exist in delivering on climate action. So in doing so, we'd like to recommend that within the action points of LD3 and going forward, that we identify existing mechanisms that complement one another in financing climate change, biodiversity, and adaptation, and in meeting the 100 billion financial commitment that was made. Moreover, I'd like to also highlight that these mechanisms complement one another, and that we do partner with one another, and also recall that the climate financing gap is in the trillions, with some estimates as high as 3.7 trillion. So these financing needs to be tied to instruments that are flexible and are able to de-risk and crowd in the private sector. So therefore, we would also suggest that recommendations should include taking stock of the innovating financing products that are already at play, which we would be happy to further elaborate on at a further point, and to also take into consideration country ownership and local context of communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adna. Thank you for that. And that resonates with earlier recommendations on the discussion around mobilizing finance and aligning finance, and carrying through on the commitments that have been made, of the 100 billion per year commitment, for example. You also talked about the large climate financing deficit of 3.7 trillion. These are really important numbers. And then we need to think about not just specific funds, but also systemic shifts. If I can be so bold, and the Green Climate Fund is part of that. Thank you for being with us. I'm going to turn to the next speaker now, who's joining us from the floor, who is Annika Eriksson from the Geneva Peacebuilding Platform. Annika, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Annika Eriksson Pearson, and I make today's comment on behalf of a group to which I will link in the chat. You've seen my name quite a lot talking about peace and conflict sensitivity. As we know, peace is an essential element of sustainable development. And I have 3 suggestions today for concrete action. I know time is quite limited, so I won't outline this inextricable link between peace and environmental and financial policy, the sort of what, but I will link to that in the chat. In terms of concrete action, however, in this leadership dialogue, we see great opportunity. First, in accelerating the mobilization of finance, financing needs to be conflict sensitive. I just linked to a great example from the Jeff in the chat. Donors should follow suit and adopt funding criteria which require the integration of peace building or conflict sensitivity perspectives. There's incredible work coming out on climate finance for peace, including through peace bonds, which de-risk investments in fragile contexts and attract private capital. This must be accelerated and mainstreamed. Co-benefits of climate finance for peace should be explicitly mentioned and discussed within this leadership dialogue. It is a leadership dialogue. A just transition and prosperity for all is only realized by enhancing peace, and war, as we know, is development in reverse. So the second concrete point is, as recommended in rounds 1 and 2, we also want to strongly recommend the inclusion of language around conflict sensitivity when it comes to digital tools, digital transformation, digital access. It has great potential and great risk. Programs and projects should include peace or conflict sensitive related indicators or targets, as there is risk there. And third and finally, in regards to governance, policy should allocate resources to staff capacity, organizational practices that allow for this, this integration between the different silos. I'll post to a couple of different blogs in the chat that actually just launched today that add another sort of round of concrete mechanisms and pathways to do this. But policy really can help codify and guide such collaborations. Thank you for creating this space for our contribution to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Annika. Thank you for squeezing that into 2 minutes. I know that's not easy. You do have the chat box for links for follow-up, and of course, you know, all the different LinkedIn and other channels as well. I think the GGKP has a space as well for sharing. But the very important point about climate finance for peace, that also goes to the point that Adil was making up front, which is we have a reality that you know, we're going over 1.5 essentially. So we need to adapt and we need to organize ourselves, including our finance, for that, or we are going to have a lot of insecurity around that point. I'm going to turn to the next speaker now, who is Christian Zauner from Parents for the Future. Christian, are you with us? And this will probably be our last speaker unless we can identify Norita, who I called to the mic earlier. Norita, if you're in the audience, please raise your hand. But otherwise, we will go to you, Christian.
Thank you, dear fellow parents within these sessions and dear other adults who are soon to be parents. We as Parents for Future are mandated to think about the future of our children, and therefore I'd like to introduce one thing regarding future governance as a model. We would like to introduce a prototypical child born on June 2nd, 2022, and based on best available science, project on a country basis how this life can look like, and then optimize our actions towards securing that this child will be able to speak at Stockholm Plus 100 in 2072 in June, assuming it's still alive, and be proud of the text the leadership dialogues will present on June 3rd this year. In addition, what we think is needed for that is that skin in the game for elected politicians, staff of international organizations, and at least CEOs and board members of public listed companies and corporations need to get some additional, certification level. So we need to be sure that all of these mentioned groups are aware of the basics leading to our problems. So laws of physics, biology, chemistry, at least the basics, pluralistic economy and system dynamics, so that we can be sure that they know what consequences their actions and decisions might have. Please compare it to a surgeon. Nobody wants to be under the knife of a surgeon who hasn't finished his medical education. I know this is quite an ask, but I think it's necessary. We are in a dire situation. Our children don't have a good future protected on our current trend. And I really hope all these emissions on travel and everything invested somehow, going all of us to Stockholm, will really pay off for our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Another voice of conscience to compelling us to think about how we are moving as we move towards Stockholm Plus 50, and of course the future generations as well. You spoke on behalf of parents, but of course parents are just simply custodians of the future generation for a short time. So Mustafa, Annika, we've had some really thought-provoking contributions in this session. They've gone beyond governance, digital technology, but across to finance. But I would like to give you a space to reflect before we move to session 3. Mustafa, any quick reflections from you?
Thank you very much, Stephen. And once again, thank you very much to each and every participant in this session. You really gave us a lot of food for thought. And let me start right away with the comments made by Adil Najm, and I just can't state how much I agree with his statement. And it feeds into exactly what I called, or what we called before, that we should not create something new. Adil said that it is time to stop the treaty clutter. And it is time to stop the treaty clutter. It is time to give space for action, to see to evaluate what we can do and what we cannot do. And it's time to get focused on everything. Adil also said that Stockholm 1972 was a revolution, and I agree. But Stockholm 2022 should not be a revolution. It should be an evolution of the entire processes. I don't think we have enough time for a new revolution that would eliminate everything that has been achieved, be it little or much, and start new processes. But again, Adil, I cannot agree with you more on your ideas. And again, and moving to Karthik, and please accept my apologies for not being able to correctly pronounce your last name, Balakrishnan, I think. We have said during the sessions that no government can do it alone, and I think Karthik touched on that, giving importance of the role of private sector, especially in extending the digital infrastructure necessary to help the evolving governance practices that we need. And we strongly support the involvement of private sector, especially in expansion of digital access, and in the establishment of the repositories and systems that would support, and tailored systems that would support various sectors. Again, the issue of conflict sensitivity is very important. Climate change causes conflict, and it's caused by conflict. Conflict sensitivity is one of the important matters and themes that maybe we should have a look at, in including them in our discussion in concluding remarks. And lastly, two quick comments. Youth participation. Egypt has a pilot. It's not anymore. It's not a pilot program anymore. But Egypt has started 6 years ago a platform to actively engage youth in each and every decision or each and every policy debate in Egypt. The youth forums, that is currently an international version of it, the youth forum in Egypt did actually lead to a policy input, actual policy input that was later formulated and carried by the government. The youth have a say they should be included. We need to listen to their input if the current platforms and mechanisms are sufficient, if there need to be more, what is their view, how can that be done, and to analyze that and see how can they be better integrated into the entire system. And lastly, the issue of education. As a person referred to nature-based education, and I was wondering if we'd rather have nature conscious, and because I think the issue is that we need to shape the consciousness of the future generations, towards the preservation and conservation of this planet. These were just my quick comments on this session, and then I apologize if I took a bit more time.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Mustafa. Very concise sum up, actually. And I was thinking, probably the conversation in Leadership Dialogue 1 on resetting the relationship with nature probably will also have a lot to say about nature conscious education as part of investing in our youth. Annika, any quick reflections on the session 2 of the dialogue?
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Mustafa, for your consideration and your reflections. Maybe I touch upon a bit different things here. Yes, I think that Karthik, you sort of reminded us of this the ability of digital technologies to really transfer knowledge and to create this space for accountability and transparency, be it governments or businesses or other actors. And I think the technology is there, and the open data is there. Everything is there. It's just that, and the platforms, there are also multiple platforms going exist. So this is just that we understand and take advantage of these platforms. We have in Finland this kind of a platform for operational commitments for sustainable development, which is an online platform where political parties, companies, schools, businesses can give their own concrete commitments, and everything is online available and trackable, traceable also, and it's quite I think successful mechanism also, like nationwide, to really provide transparent information on different commitments that different actors have given in Finland for the implementation of the 2030 agenda, but have a worldwide. I think it would be really a success story. Also I think introduced many very interesting and implementable concrete proposals on how to really operationalize or institutionalize intergenerational equity, the ombudsman, future committees or future labs. we have in Finland this youth group for the Agenda 2030 youth group who is invited to support and challenge the government policies, for instance, on the implementation of the 2030 agenda. And this is also what most of what explained about their system, I think, was also very interesting. What is happening in Egypt. So a sustainability impact assessment would be really, really powerful, I believe. It's kind of an ex ante system that when policymakers and planners are doing, drafting legislation or strategies or whatever, all the actions would need to go through this ex ante sustainability impact assessment. I think it would be very powerful. Last, I would like to a bit challenge of what Adil, what you said about the sort of of course Stockholm 72 was a success story, and of course if all those promises that governments and others gave there would have been fulfilled, we would be much better off, the whole world. But I would also say that the world has changed, and we need to have integrated systemic solutions to systemic problems. And I think that in earlier years, we worked too much in silos. We tried to eradicate poverty by only like conventional means, not really looking at what is happening to the environment or not really considering other aspects of sustainable development. We had sort of development constituency and then the environment constituency working in separation from each other. Now we need to bring everybody together to really find integrated measures, integrated financing and things like that. And I think this could be kind of a new way of accelerating the change, accelerating the implementation. Not to say that we need to keep up our promises, but to really maybe look at how to do things in a more efficient way and effective way. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annika. And if I'm not mistaken, one of the hats you wear is the SDG commissioner, isn't it, for Finland? Yeah. So it's very interesting to hear about the platform that you have for SDG commitments in Finland, and that's something that sounds very, very interesting and very apropos to learn more about. Well, with that, we shift to session 3, which actually is about renewing multilateralism, strengthening multilateralism. We have a new set of invited speakers to help kick off this conversation. We're running a little bit behind time, but I think that's a sign that it's been a very rich conversation so far. Renewing and strengthening multilateralism, some of the emerging recommendations are about acknowledge, respect, integrate local history, knowledge, and social cultural contexts in development strategies that point about bringing development into the environment conversation. Multilateralism that respects gender equality, women's empowerment, the right to development, and the principle that no one is left behind, as the equity principle, that we use broad-based partnerships that are there, strengthen them, perhaps create new ones if there's a gap, but really strengthen the ones that are there for these synergistic solutions. And Annika, you just mentioned that point again. And then effective multilateralism to involve youth and local partnerships with local communities. So really about anchoring multilateralism in strong, vibrant communities that are based on local knowledge. We have some very, very interesting speakers to help kick off this conversation, session 3, on renewing and reinventing multilateralism. So I'd like to invite Karana Gore, who's the director for Earth Ethics, to turn on her camera. Deka Musa Rage, who's a senior regional advisor from the Green Fiscal Policy Network based in India, I believe. And Melina Sakiyama, the co-founder of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, to kick off the conversation today. Karana, are you there with us? Could you turn on your camera and your microphone, please?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Excellent, loud and clear. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to the UNEP Stockholm Plus 50 coordination team who organized these important dialogues and meetings. I'm Karenna Gore, founder and executive director of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. It's my honor to speak to the issue of strengthening multilateralism, which is key to grasping and acting on several aspects of that relationship between development and environment. Thoughts affect actions, so although I will be specific in recommendations, I will also speak from an overview perspective. Economic development has come at the expense of nature because of a mistaken perception and a flawed value system. The mistaken perception or belief is that human beings are separate and superior to nature. The flawed value system is based on short-term privatized material gain, with faith in ever-increasing cycles of production and consumption without regard to planetary boundaries. When this misperception and flawed value system was harnessed to the Industrial Revolution and the colonial ethos, it created two modern megatrends that have brought us to the crisis point we are at today. The two megatrends causing the climate emergency are pollution and depletion. Pollution, particularly the methane and carbon pollution caused by extraction and burning of fossil fuels, and depletion, particularly of carbon sinks like forest and wetlands, which of course are also habitat for the many living species that are decimated as collateral damage. I commend the insightful leaders who are working to see this cause and effect relationship clearly, rather than talking about pollution, climate, and biodiversity as separate crises, lest we miss the chance to act clearly on the level of cause and not merely react to effects. One of our biggest problems is that outside of these forums, the global economy continues to be conceived of and talked about without regard to the ongoing assault on our planetary life support system, which the Secretary General has rightly described as a war against nature. Who suffers most from this war? Those who are least likely to have a voice in development decisions, marginalized people who live without monetary wealth, future generations, and all non-human life. Multilateralism must consciously include those perspectives in all forums, including through increased engagement with Indigenous peoples and youth. Multilateralism is essential because we live in an interconnected world in which the laws of nature are higher laws that pay no attention to political boundaries. Synergy between development and environment cannot happen if the economic development metrics of the SDGs continue to dominate their ecological aspects. Multilateralism must also create mechanisms to hold multinational corporations accountable. They have immense power, which can be used for good, yet by their very nature, they will still prioritize their own markets and profits at the expense of the common good, unless the people, through their governments, keep them honest. I commend the leadership of Stockholm Plus 50 for naming the difficult and urgent challenge to get off fossil fuels. It is not only government inaction that we must tackle to address this, it is wrong-headed government actions that must stop. Governments around the world are still actively supporting the fossil fuel system, including trillions of dollars in subsidies and permits for drilling, extraction, and burning. This alone threatens to set back all other gains in development. So one goal of multilateralism is to make sure all major development projects go through the lens of the Paris Agreement and SDG 13. We must also re-examine the ways we talk about poverty and wealth. As Indigenous peoples have been warning us for centuries, it is wrong to label living closely within the means of one's local ecosystem as poverty to be eradicated. Indigenous peoples make up a small percentage of the global population, but hold 80% of the world's biodiversity. Their presence is essential at all multilateral conversations. And I commend the recognition of gender equality. Gender equality is not only about freeing human beings from educational and professional limitations based on gender, it is about bringing the devalued aspects of life that are associated with the feminine right to the top and the center of what is valued by all. I'm wrapping up now. It is not incidental that the earth has been conceived of as feminine in most belief systems around the world. And so in this context, again, I recommend a concerted effort to be sure that environmental aspects of sustainable development are elevated, not dominated, and that we engage faith communities in the work that they can partner on to change that misperception and flawed value system that is driving the destruction that we know we must end. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Karina. You've touched on a lot of points, but the flawed value system that's leading to pollution and depletion and sort of cutting off the branch that we're sitting on in some ways, and you've said that very eloquently. I'd like to move to our next speaker who will help us deepen that. And this is Deka Musa. I'm probably not pronouncing your name again right either. I see you're from UNECA, so I'm delighted, a sister UN agency. Deka, over to you to help us think about renewed multilateralism. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and good day, distinguished participants. I'm Deka, Regional Advisor in Natural Capital at Natural Capital in United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And on behalf of Director Jean-Paul Adam, I'm delighted to highlight some of the initiatives that UNECA is leading to support its member states to achieve SDGs and Africa's Agenda 2063. Let me begin by recalling that while Africa is not the source of the current climate change, it is suffering the full consequence of it. The last IPCC reports leave no room for doubt. There are just few years left to reverse global warming and limit the effects of climate change. In simple words, adaptation is a matter of life and death for Africa, which is identified as one of the most vulnerable hotspots when it comes to climate disaster. To reap further benefits from adaptation, several constraints must be overcome, including improved governance, climate literacy, and access to finance. I will highlight some of the initiatives in progress to address this last barrier of large deficits of financial resources to fight against the major challenge of our time. And the longer we wait, the wider the gap becomes. So 2 points. First, in time of limited resources, as it has already been said, and intensified nature degradation rates, we conduct multi-sectoral research and analysis trying to answer simple questions. Are there nature-friendly investments that would enable short-term economic recovery while unlocking long-term sustainable development? The answer is yes. I will not comment in details, but studies in pilot countries show that planting seeds for green recovery now can also unlock long-term sustainable development. I can mention as an example, the investment in climate smart agriculture, it has already been said, and the development of sustainable value chain that would offer a better return on investment than traditional investment. Well, how to raise the funds to finance these very exciting avenues for the green recovery? As our convening function, we are expanding several multilateral instruments to reduce the cost of green and blue borrowing, to scale up debt for climate swaps, to continue the work on green budgeting, and to leverage domestic resources. And we come to the second point I would like to develop a little today. Mobilizing domestic financing is increasingly key to improve Africa's SDGs performance. African countries have a good opportunity ahead of the coming Stockholm meeting and the COP27 after to leverage this considerable natural sequestration asset the whole humanity is benefiting from. The continent could build resilience by protecting sensitive areas while also raising much needed capital that can be invested in national priorities. A great example to mention is the peatlands of the Congo Basin that alone sequester the equivalent of 3 years worth of global emission. Can you imagine if local communities develop as business as usual? Could we also imagine if Congo Basin countries could monetize these carbon sinks? They could leverage far more financial resources that are needed to achieve SDGs. We are currently supporting these member states to tap into the voluntary market for carbon credit by promoting harmonized protocol for market integrity to achieve a green and blue and resilience growth. I began by saying that Africa is not the climate problem. I would like to end by adding that it could even be the solution if it is fairly supported. It is therefore becoming important to take better account of Africa's specific needs in global finance. One innovating approach for a renewed multilateralism could be considered moving from a system classifying countries based on their exposure to climate change and shocks rather than their incomes. Thank you, and we'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Deka, for sharing that perspective from Africa, who, as you say, is very much on the receiving end of a changing climate. And you've talked about climate literacy as well as climate finance, and you came forward with some very interesting solutions also for monetizing carbon sinks and global carbon services. I'm going to move to our third speaker now, who is Melina Sakiyama. She's the co-founder of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. And Melina, again, a request to you to help us think through, are these emerging recommendations and actions, are they practical, are they feasible, are they socially just? Melina, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Thank you. So thank you for the chairs and for everybody that is here today. I think the conversation so far has been really enriching, and I'm happy to speak after both Decca and Karina, as I think what I'm going to say is very complementary, especially from the point of view of like ethics. And this is my first point, actually. So I come from the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. My generation was not even in the plans of my parents in '72, and was like not even born or very small in the '90s when we had the Rio the Rio Summit. And I think what we are seeing now with the millennial generation and the post-millennial generation is that we don't have trust in the system. We don't have trust in the democratic institutions anymore. We don't have trust in the politics or in the economics or in the businesses or in the science. And like, I think that it's what people need to be thinking of, why this generation is not feeling that they belong to this, or is not feeling that they can believe like in what is being said and in what is being done. And it's because of decades, if not centuries, of marginalization and of like not really like listening to this generation, not really caring about this generation's futures with them present in the room. Right. And I'm not just talking about young people. I'm talking about women. I'm talking about indigenous peoples and local communities. They're part of the rights holders groups that have been marginalized from decision making, from wealth accumulation, and from all positions of power. So I think first we need to understand how to build a new trustful relationship with this generation and with those groups, because indigenous peoples and local communities, they are the ones at the front line of nature conservation, of nature protection, of sustainability. And young people are the future, basically. And at the moment, they are probably 50% of the global population. So how can we afford to marginalize these groups, right? Second, like, I think the first step really to rebuild this trustful relationship is to really go back to principles. And I think Karina was very good in bringing up the ethos and all the values that have been like perverse or corrupted along the times. We cannot forget that our sole priority of our society at this moment is maximize profit. So we are exchanging the maximization of profit and accumulation of wealth in the hands of very few, like compared to everything else, all the benefits that comes from nature and from like the well-being that it provides. Like we are putting profit before lives of people, before cultures, before everything else. Is that really good? I think we need to start looking at everything, not only through the tools or to the policy mechanisms or economic incentives, but also through the lens of ethics and principles and values. Right? The first step should be really like remediation, reconciliation, decolonization. We need to take care of our responsibilities of what has been done and address the historical imbalances and the historical oppression so that we can move forward towards a more fair and just and equitable path through the future. Right? And then the how, so how can we do that? I think it's 2 points, like see the invisible, and it's really through transformation. So like through justice, inclusion, rights, and diversity. So if we are like continue to do our like policy, our economics, our businesses, our science without diversity, without inclusion, without like reaching out to rights holders, without reaching out to communities, without like including voices of all these diverse groups, like we are just doing the same. It doesn't matter how many innovative mechanisms you propose. It doesn't matter how many subsidies you clash or phase out or money you inject. It's not going to help, because you're going to be perpetuating the same oppressive, unsustainable, inequitable system that we are living. So from the aspect of the recommendations, I think they are all brilliant. But if I may, from my vision of bringing the voices of future generation and a little bit of like poking, I would like to see us less shy, you know, in really saying what we really need, which is justice, equity, and rights, and responsibility over the oppression that is being done. So I would suggest that it would be like an overarching recommendation that is focused on those cross-cutting areas, because we all know when the policy comes down to the policymakers and to the implementers, like the cross-cutting issues are the ones that are least paid attention to. Thank you so much. I'm also going to send in some documents that my constituency has prepared that could support this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Melina, for the call to going back to principles, to ethics and values, social inclusion, focus on justice and rights, and also diversity as a source of strength, and also legitimacy, I might add. I want to come back to you with a quick question, though, because you said we've lost trust in politics, in you named a number of things, and then you came actually to science, and you said even science. I just want to prod you on that a little bit. Why even science? What leads you to doubt the science?
So because like science, as any other system that has been constructed and developed, especially like after Illuminism and so on, has still very colonial systems to it, right? Like we still see a lot of like patriarchy, colonial mechanisms. It's very hierarchical, and for many centuries, it really ignored the other knowledge systems. So they suppose that they were constructing an ideal of truth, right? Which is valid. It has its own scientific methodology and so on, but it completely marginalized other knowledge systems. And I think now, like the answers that we're looking for, like the ways forward, because I don't like to talk in terms of solutions, are really coming from these other knowledge systems and not so much from these Western systems that have been so much, co-opted in some sort of way. And I think like young people nowadays, they are really looking more beyond what is out there, you know, beyond the data, or beyond. They need to understand what is the intentionality of your science, what are the value systems behind it. And I think, yeah, that's why I thought that it's happening there as well.
No, thank you, Melina. It's very important to hear that point of view, and to understand that there's a context in which everything sits. And so you're also questioning the context in which objective science is being conceived and delivered. Well, this, again, very thought-provoking from our invited speakers. The floor is now open, so some colleagues have raised their hands from the floor, and we're going to give them a chance to speak. The first one is from Kenya. It's Keshi Judy Njenga from the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force, followed by Carolina Iklo, Stockholm Environment for Peace Research, George Anjaparedji from Veritas Global, and then also Arvind Kumar from the India Water Foundation. We'll see how far we get in terms of our time and the speakers, and I would ask you to turn on your cameras or raise your hand so that you can be seen by our floor. So let me just see if Keshi is with us. Keshi Njenga from Kenya. Could you turn on your microphone and your camera if you're with us? If not, then we will go to Carolina. Carolina Iklo. Not yet. So I am seeing George with even a hand up. So George, you've been very patient. So over to you, George.
Great, thanks for this opportunity. My name is George Anjaparedji. I represent Veritas Global, a Swiss economics and strategy think tank, and advisory focused on climate change economics and infrastructure finance. So as per the request of the co-chairs, I'll focus on the how. So how to make progress on the 3 topics mentioned. So on topics 2 and 3, on improving governance and strengthening multilateralism, the UN regional groups offer an appropriate starting point for any governance arrangement, and subsequently other constituencies may be added to the decision-making table as the needs may arise. So But I'd like to come back on the first topic, which is on scaling up finance to achieve SDGs and the goals under the Paris Agreement. And really, things start there for Stockholm Plus 50 by making good on existing climate finance commitments, making good on the $100 billion per year commitment that developed countries made would help crowd in an additional $600 billion in finance. Sure, that's not going to fill the entire finance gap, but it will go a long way. Our analysis actually shows that less than half of the promised finance has been mobilized. I'm happy to share that link in the chat. But look, it's very simple. When you don't get a passing mark on a test, you have to retake the exam. And Stockholm Plus 50 offers an opportunity for developed countries to commit to passing the 100 billion test in 2022. The good news is that making good on the promise isn't just in the interest of developing countries, it creates real economic benefits for developed countries and their citizens through cushioning impacts of climate change and reinforcing relationships of trade and international collaboration around the world. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, George, for putting it like that very simply about passing the test. And I think that resonates also with the what we heard in the beginning, which is it's time to act on the commitments. We've heard that from a number of participants. So apparently some of our participants who had raised their hands needed to drop off and jump across. So I'm just going to do a quick check, and then if I don't hear from them, then I'll go to our co-chairs because we are running close to our time. We want to wrap up around 1/2 the hour. We might go a little bit longer. So let me just see if Rob Wheeler. Rob, are you with? Yes, I did see you. Rob, over to you, please.
Thank you. In regards to how we can accelerate the transfer of knowledge, know-how, and technology and scale up access to digital goods and services and critical infrastructure, there are millions of organizations and community-based groups like my organization, Global Eco-Village Network, that want to help make the transition to a regenerative and sustainable future, but lack the resources to be able to truly and effectively do so. Funding thus needs to be provided to support the work of all organizations that are able and want to take effective action to help make the transition, and an ongoing process and effort need to be developed by the international community to ensure that such funding is provided for all that need it. We also need the specific means and vehicles to support the scaling up and replicating of best practices and to invest in community-based approaches to transitioning to sustainable and regenerative development in communities of all sizes. Professor Maury Albertson, who designed the initial U.S. Peace Corps program, suggested creating a global network of locally based bioregional resource and service centers and training programs to support local communities to transitioning to sustainable development. Each center could be set up as though it is a locally based small or medium-sized enterprise or business that provides training programs, access to appropriate technologies, goods and services, microfinancing, and ongoing maintenance of these technologies and practices after they're developed and installed. The local to global networks of these centers could encourage and support the local to global exchange of best practices and information and provide a means for scaling up and replicating best practices and success stories, ensuring that they are profitable. Each service center and resource center could service perhaps 20 to 50 local villages or small towns within a bioregion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rob. You're reminding me of the huge challenge that urbanization poses for all of us, with more than half the world's population now moving into urban centers, and what that means for our metabolism rates, especially from when we're drawing from regional spaces like the ones that you're talking about. I hope you will put some of those concrete solutions into the chat box and share them with our co-chairs and with our participants. Colleagues of our invited speakers, Tadeka, Melina, Karina, it's been wonderful having you. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to stay on. We'll have now a chance for our co-chairs to wrap up both session 3, where they've heard from you, but also across sessions 1 and 2 as well. And then finally, we'll hear from our co-hosts from Sweden and Kenya as we close up this third informal working group. I believe that for the opening, we had Annika was first and then followed by Mustafa. So Mustafa, I'm going to come to you first for your wrap-up remarks, both on this session, the invited speakers, and also what we've heard earlier today. Mustafa, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And once again, I extend my deepest gratitude and thanks to each and every participant, expert, and panelists who have spoken not only on the last session, but during the entire working group, and especially the last session to Karina, to Deka, and to Melina. Thank you very much, and to the participants from the floor. Thank you very much. What I would take from the last session, three major headlines, and let me start by the most contentious, in my opinion. I would take that we need to renew and regenerate the faith and belief of the younger generations in the system, the entire system. Governments, policy making, in financial institutions, education, the entire system. It is obvious from what Melina said that there is a trust gap. There is a trust gap, and that gap needs to be bridged, and it needs to be bridged now. We need to work on methods. How can we do that? How can we do that without falling into the fault of pointing fingers and exchanging blame? I think this is one thing that we should avoid. Governments, parents, groups, pointing blame does not take us forward. At best, it maintains the status quo. So we need to think of ways to bridge that gap. And in thinking about those ways, we need to listen more to the input of the younger generations who need to cross that bridge. So they need to have an input in how to construct it, how to build it in order to cross it safely and securely, to reintegrate, if I may say so, or to regenerate that trust. That would be the first message I would take. The second message, and I refer to Deka, Africa might be the route to the solution. I agree with you 100%. Data show that the least industrialized countries contribute the least amount to emissions and to pollution in general. I think there is a need to put a special focus and to take into more account Africa's special needs in climate finance. We need to listen to proposals, to concrete proposals. What is needed, what can be channeled, and what can be done right now. And lastly, the third and last message is that multilateral action is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's a must. It is the rule of the day. We have stated various times that no one can do it alone. No one actor, no one sector, no one group can act upon itself and achieve any sort of success, especially in the interdependent world that we live in today. I thank you all for the messages that you have conveyed and the ideas that you have raised during the session. And Stephen, if you allow me to wrap up rapidly on the entire working group today. We listen to expert opinions. We listen to enduring proposals. What can we take on to Stockholm? What can we take with us? How can we formulate concrete ideas, concrete proposals, actionable proposals? I again refer to my earlier message at the introduction when I said we need practical, feasible, and just solutions, and we need programs and proposals. We need proposals and recommendations that seamlessly integrate within the existing system, within the existing mechanisms, and within the existing processes. We need the honoring of pledges and commitments already made, not just to scale up finance. We need, before we scale up finance, we need to honor what is promised. We need to honor what is promised before we think what is more to come. Like the last participant, and forgive me if I don't recall the name. You need to pass the exam before thinking of the next. And if you don't pass the exam, you need to retake it. You need to we need to honor the existing pledges and commitments before we're thinking of thinking of how to scale up, how to channel more. It does not serve any purpose if we agree on channeling more money when the original amount has never been honored, if I may say. There is a need to formulate a mechanism and a proposal on harmful subsidies, if I may use the term, while at the same time honoring the ideas of responsibility, of the right to development, of equity, justice, in asymmetric national context. We need to figure out. We need to figure out as well in such discussion, how can technology transfer, innovation, sort of help and support such transformation, how that transformation can be gradual rather than sudden, and the need to make available such technology and at a reasonable cost to developing nations. I think we need to take to Stockholm through the ideas that we heard today, an abbreviated document of what we have right now. We need to summarize those into actionable proposals, as I said, taking into consideration the three main pillars that have been or the three axes that I have talked about: the practicality, the feasibility, and the justice. We need to look at education. We need to look at inclusion. We need to look at the youth. We need to look at the clutter of international agreements and treaties that is right now in the international system, and to sort of rationalize all of that. I thank each and every panelists and experts that have participated along the three sessions, and each and every participant that have shared his ideas, however aggressive they might have been, the ideas I mean. I thank everyone who have participated in New York and who have endured these discussions with us. I assure you that every every thought and every statement has been heard, has been read, has been taken into account, and I thank the entire support team from the United Nations, from UNEP, the entire support team without whom this practice that we are doing would have definitely been impossible. And I definitely thank Annika, our co-host, our co-chair, I'm sorry, for her fruitful insight and her support as well for us. And every single word you said, Annika, has been highly appreciated. I extend my thanks definitely to our co-hosts, Sweden and Kenya. And hopefully we can come up with a decent outcome to be taken to Stockholm. And thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. I hear you rising to the challenge that was thrown down by a number of participants and speakers in terms of throwing down the gauntlet and coming up with and you yourself threw it down, actionable, pragmatic, just, feasible solutions. So with that, I would turn it over to our co-chair from Finland, Annika Lindbom.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you, Mustafa, for your kind words. And I can only echo that it has been my pleasure to work with you. And I think this is also, you know, the spirit, the nice spirit and good collaboration between the co-chairs and together with UNEP and with the co-hosts has been one of the success factor of this leadership dialogue, and all the constructive messages and critical messages, radical messages that we have heard from all of you today and during the previous sessions. So I think many things have already been said. When it comes to the last round on multilateralism, I was struck by what Melina was saying about trust. Melina, sorry, was saying about trust and you know, and also, I mean, that science has ignored other knowledge systems, and people want to know what is the value system behind the science. And I think this is also something that we need to consider, maybe something that we haven't thought so much about, because we have taken it, you know, for granted that we have the science, and we are of course very grateful for having the science in the world where there are lots of fake news and everything, but also that there is other types of knowledge that we should maybe consider much more seriously when we talk about sustainable future. And this takes me to my point on when we have talked about intergenerational equity, which is very important, and at the core of this whole process, I think that the Stockholm +50 meeting. But I remember in our previous informal working group, also the intercultural equity was introduced. I don't know, maybe it was someone who is also participating from this event. And I think that was very, very important point, and also, you know, touches upon the things that you, Melina, mentioned in your intervention, that in order to bridge and fill the trust gap, we need to not only have intergenerational dialogue and solutions, but also intercultural, you know, dialogue and solutions. And this process has been very nice, you know, example of doing this. And we have talked about, you know, that we need fundamentally to change the movement of money and redefine success, what we mean by success, and that success actually should be something beyond money. And we need to have a renewed focus on access, quality, and quantity of finance. And I have been thinking that actually what we need, and this is not only about finance, this is also about policies and politics, but that we need a narrative from maximization, how do I pronounce it, of profit at any price to good life within the planetary boundaries. I think this of course we in our declarations and political speeches we speak with these nice words, but at the concrete level, then when we go into the everyday lives, we can see this business as usual economic narrative taking huge part of our everyday life and the politics and whatever is happening in our own societies and worldwide. So this might be something that we want to highlight also in Stockholm Plus 50. We have talked a lot about reforming environmentally harmful subsidies, and I like the way in which I don't remember who was it during the first round, that actually if we want to be more politically acceptable in our wordings, maybe we should talk about realigning subsidies towards environmentally positive outcomes or something like that. So it's sometimes funny that also the way in which you speak the words, the language is very important, how it attracts different constituencies and policymakers and people in power. And I think also we maybe should pay more attention on how we formulate different messages, that they are maybe have this positive narrative behind it rather than a negative one. But of course the message should be very clear. We need to get rid of the harmful subsidies, but to really make it more positive might be a good strategy. There's so many things I would like to pick up. Maybe from my own background also, I think this is maybe not so concrete either, but I would still like to emphasize that we need to move away from the siloed discussion on environment alone, climate alone, economy alone, society alone, health. We need to find integrated solutions, but because I truly believe that one of the problems in accelerating financing, accelerating action has been that we have worked in silos and we have not known what our counterparts. Working from the Ministry of the Environment, my counterparts in other ministries may have made decisions that work against my objectives, the objectives in my own ministry. So really to have the policy coherence and tools to improve and develop policy coherence nationally and globally, I think is one important step. And we already heard some good tools to that. And for instance, I personally believe that if we would have this integrated sustainability assessment in all policy planning, that would already be a huge step forward, that could be a mandatory step in our policy processes, that we would ensure that we have same objectives, we have measures that head towards the same end, to sustainable future. Well, I think I will stop here because there's so many things to say, and there will be a lot of different kinds of summaries that our able secretariat is drafting, and I wish we could continue having these informal working group meetings, because I have learned a lot from you and also from my dear co-chair Egypt during these 3 meetings and during this process. But luckily we will have our high high-level dialogue in Stockholm, and I hope that our deliberations during this preparatory process can provide a solid, and concrete recommendations for the ministers to discuss about. So thank you all, and see you in Stockholm.
Thank you so much, Annika, for that summary, and also, if I may say, your very open attitude to all the different, I think you called it critical messages, radical messages, but you didn't discard them. You listened to them and you considered them, and I think that makes for a very open working environment. So we're coming now to the part of the informal working group where we're really wrapping up. We've heard from our two co-chairs at the end of this informal working group. And I'd like to turn now to our colleagues from Kenya, if they're still with us, for any final remarks. And then Ambassador Lissinger, I see you on the screen, and I will turn the word over to you. Let me just check, Dr. Macharia, are you with us for any closing remarks? And if...
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Just to thank all the facilitators. We have had a fruitful session. This one added to what had been done so far in area engagements, propels us to another level. And now we can comfortably say that we have gotten very good ideas, and which will be presented to further engagement in Stockholm. I wish to thank everybody for that, and we look forward to a fruitful outcome from Stockholm. And thanks everybody for your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Macharia, for being with us live from Kenya. I now turn it to our co-host from Sweden, Ambassador Lissinger. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And maybe just as a closing, if I'm allowed just to do a personal reflection. When we started the journey on Stockholm Plus 50, many colleagues from civil society, member states, etc., conveyed the message of trying to do things differently. And I think we have been trying to do things differently. And that these informal working groups with a huge variety of participants is a sign of trying to have a more inclusive variety of voices. If we have succeeded, I think it's not for me to make the judgment but for those who have participated. Annika, I take your comment also of a wish of being able to continue the discussions, at least as a good sign that this has been very much adding value. And I think from the co-host perspective, we, I think, feel very confident and also humble for all of the time that all of you have taken from UNEP, from the co-chairs team, from the different organizations, member states you represent, to feed in to this very, I think, crucial part of the preparations. I often speak of, when we speak about meetings, we tend to focus on, the 2 days or the 2 weeks somewhere, but a lot of action and thinking is actually happening in between meetings and in preparation for the meeting. Some of you may have heard my minister speak to 3 areas where I think she was hoping to see Stockholm contributing to change. She talked about in New York in her statement of systematic actions for a healthy planet and human well-being that is bridging the agendas that are looking behind traditional measures for growth. She spoke about closing the implementation gap, strengthening partnerships, financing, aligning and scale up financing, expand the community of voices, including the youth. And having listening to all of the 3 informal working groups and absolutely today, I think we feel very confident that together with the input that has been given here, together with the co-chairs, together with all of the participants coming to Stockholm, we will be able to deliver strong and forward-looking recommendations and actions on these different topics. So I think just really to say again, thank you. A special thanks will go to, of course, the UNEP team, to our co-chairs. This is, let's say, the end of the informal working group journey, but it's definitely also the start of what will happen in Stockholm and a continuation of driving environment and sustainable development, and a continuation and strengthening of looking together, not on issues, not as silos, but as interconnected, and with a strong focus on implementation. So with that, I thank you here from Stockholm.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Lissinger, for pointing us the way to the next steps forward. And from my part, for the Secretariat team, it's been a pleasure working with you, co-chairs from Egypt and from Finland, from learning from you, and also from our co-host from Kenya and from Sweden. One last announcement from my end is, with our co-chairs under their direction, we would like to put the emerging recommendations onto the website, the Stockholm Plus 50 website, before the event, so that you participants can see there are very rich contributions that you made. And I hope Ambassador Lissinger also respond to that very provocative statement from Adil Najam, who said, you know, I want to see some very strong and compelling language coming forward. So my deep appreciation from UNEP, from the Secretariat, my thanks to the Secretariat team as well, the GGKP team that's been working, and of course to our co-hosts who have guided us every step of the way, Mustafa and Annika, thank you very much. And good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Bye-bye.